Okay, we are excited to be back here again. We got another completely new topic that we're excited to share with you. We think it's going to be a little more, I guess, applicable to just a broader audience. But before that, we got another kind of exciting piece of news. We have officially changed our name. Originally, we were Rick's Idea Book, which is now become The Idea Bank. So find our new website, ideabanknow.com, and we're really excited about the new idea or the new name because, um, you know, this isn't just about our ideas. This is, supposed to be an open exchange sort of, and we're inviting obviously new people in. And, I guess, what do you think about this new change in the name?
Yes, lots of good things to be said about that. Very important for you folks to consider also. Part of the reason we decided, as Rick said, was to change the name and make it a little more broad because we felt it was a little too narrow, and our thought process went perhaps beyond the scope of just our ideas or specific ideas. So this really opens it up. And we did struggle with the name because it's hard to get space these days.
Yeah.
There's so many websites that are taken. So we feel like we opened this into a neat direction. Hopefully you'll agree. And hopefully when you go out to ideabanknow.com, you'll follow us and enjoy some of the content that we're presenting. So.
Yeah, and that brings up another topic too, where we were kind of deciding whether or not we should continue recording under the old name, at risk of brand recognition. And it goes back a little bit to what we talked about, just getting things out there and testing. So we could have waited. Our first episode was in June. Had we waited, and I think when we recorded the first episode, we might have thought of the name right before then. We might not have actually even had a name. So it would have been easy to say, "Oh, we need a name. Let's push it back. We'll figure it out." And that could have been, 5 or 6 episodes of just lost time. And it's, I think we both learned a lot already through. So I'm happy that we, um, you know, kind of were able to just keep pushing through. So happy to have kind of that direction firmed up. And again, excited to continue bringing more resources to our website, more opportunities for engagement, and continuing to share our ideas and others on our social media channels as well. So.
Yeah, to that point, couldn't agree more. You need to be ready to pivot. You need to be able to pivot and respond and follow your ideas through. So, but also to your point, do it. Just do it, and you'll figure it out and be responsive. But you get the point.
Yeah, so, yeah. I mean, companies, they change their name all the time. They'll be bought and sold and operating under new ownership. But that value that they provide can kind of overshadow or whatever, overtake some of the nuances of the naming and the organization. So the content, I think, is really the important part. But you mentioned following through or following up with your idea. I know you're still working on Lightning. We are. I don't think there's anything too groundbreaking to share since we first outlined the idea. I know you spent some time, and check out definitely the short video that you put together about digging up some cardboard for some prototypes, and excited still to get the chance to play that. But any other thoughts on the plans and the next steps there?
Sure. Well, Lightning is a great example of what we're talking about in terms of the need to pivot. So much of it is yet to be defined.
Yeah.
And where we're at, as you mentioned, is we've gotten some materials to build some prototypes, and you can follow us as we go through the process of creating these prototypes and doing some testing. And we've worked on some logos that we're going to involve you in as we proceed. Lots of fun things to do. There's always a little something to do. Definitely work on it as you're doing your own projects, though. Keep it moving. But yes, building prototypes, we're going to define the rules. I know we're coming into some winter months here in Southeast Michigan, but we're looking at different angles of this game, if you will, even possibly putting something together for an indoor use. So without dwelling too much on that, because that's not the purpose of this particular episode, that's a big one. Make sure to follow us. One of the things, by the way, too, I'll mention is that we're looking for sponsorship. And that could be another episode relative to lightning, because as you'll see later in this episode, the finance end of things is a big one.
Mm-hmm. So then that brings us now to the topic that we are here to discuss today, and that is going to be entrepreneurship in the workplace. I have a couple examples that we're excited to talk about, but the reality of it is, most people are never really in a position with capital or skill set to really be positioned to take on an entrepreneurial venture without some sort of starting point in that corporate setting. So there's, I guess, a contrary point to that. If you read the book Rich Dad Poor Dad, the author of that book talks about some of his kind of upbringing with an entrepreneurial type of mentor, where he's able to, I guess, find some creative solutions from a very young age. I mean, it was a sort of an equivalent to like a lemonade stand. I know that honestly might have been my first entrepreneurial experience out there in the driveway. You know, drawing in customers with a sign on the side of the road on a hot summer day. So that's kind of what we want to talk about, and the big, I guess, kind of difference between the entrepreneurship setting and a corporate setting sometimes is that risk versus reward. So in the corporate setting, sometimes obviously you're expected to perform and you have to produce results, but there is definitely some financial backing that you can take advantage of, some structures already put in place. So that's kind of what we're excited to talk about here. And you have any thoughts on that there?
The fact is, you can be an entrepreneur anywhere, and depending on what you seek, will define the direction you take. So not everyone is a Steve Jobs,
Mm-hmm.
not everyone is a Bill Gates. Each of those stories are very interesting unto themselves. But Rick mentions a very important point. Many of you folks out there might be in a corporate environment, whether it's a large corporation or a small corporation. And this is such a wonderful topic because it's so true. You can take an entrepreneurial mindset anywhere in any environment and make it work for you. That is truly the American way, and that's what has built this country, and will continue to build it moving forward.
Yeah.
I don't mean to sound too
No.
jump up and down, wave the flag, but you know how fortunate we are to have the freedom to do these things. And now you mentioned too the finance world. Boy, there's a lot to be said on that as well. But yes, couldn't agree more. This is a wonderful, wonderful topic, and hopefully some of the things we hit upon today will help you and will challenge you in whatever environment you're in.
Yeah, you'd make a great politician just listening to that.
Well, for me.
But to start off, I think a good
Maybe.
intersection kind of between the corporate setting and the entrepreneurship setting is something you talked about with pistachios. And I remember you talking about specifically at the convention in Chicago, and you used the term the sheep hook and kind of pulling people in. So the people that were with you from Germac, I mean, they were they part of the owners were you with at that point in the convention, trying to strum up interest in your idea at the time? Because that seems kind of like in that example, there's sort of both parties.
Good point. Very interesting thread relative to this topic. I really like that you brought that up. I hadn't even thought of this. You know, what that those were existing employees of the company of Germac, which is a fine, fine company.
Mm-hmm.
And it illustrates something very important. We were in a very entrepreneurial mindset going into that, whereas they have established customers. So they had a little bit of a different orientation,
Goal maybe
and very
too.
different
Yeah.
objectives in that setting. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I was gung ho and hungry and really interested in getting the word out on our product, whereas they had 50, 60 other products,
Mm-hmm.
long established
Yeah.
relationships. So we did have different objectives, which, as you point out, led to maybe some different emphases, if we will, if that's the right word.
Behaviors and in the convention setting.
Yep, and potentially different outcomes. We were trying to build a business. They had many maintenance angles within
Hmm.
what they were trying to accomplish. But at the time, there were none of the owners of the company there. They were
Okay.
all employees. So
Yeah, and then I guess just kind of curious, kind of on that topic. This was an entrepreneurship setting for you, but I'm sure in a corporate setting, whether it's sales or just at an industry type of convention, I guess how do you approach that? Because I know you're always super outgoing, whether it's at the store, or restaurant. You're never a stranger to talk to new folks. But how do you approach? I don't want to say like a cold call, but I mean it is in some ways kind of building a new bridge or making a whole new connection. Do you have any thoughts or tips on how people can um, position themselves to build those connections and even set it up for future follow up?
some people simply won't go out into the aisle at a convention and shake hands.
Yeah,
Someone won't walk up to people. That doesn't mean they don't have things to add. And
yeah.
it doesn't mean, and if that's you, that's fine. If that's not where you're at and that's not your mindset, don't let that discourage you from potentially pursuing an entrepreneurial mindset or project and endeavor, whether it's on your own or within a existing corporate setting. So there's a lot of things you can do um, to advance your cause. Social media creates many, many
Hmm.
unique and very powerful opportunities for doing those things. So if you're in a team environment,
Hmm.
play your strength within that
Yeah.
team. Um, so does that sort of answer
Yeah,
your
no, I
question?
mean, and
Or
that brings up another great point, and could go into other examples of this. But I heard another quote from someone I've worked with young in my career who said, "There's always somebody out there that loves doing what you hate doing." So in your example, um, your personality is set up to go out there, shake hands with people. Doesn't matter who, it could be the president of the United States, and I bet you'd be walking over, hey, how are you doing? Can I get you a coffee? I got this new product we're working on. But for others,
absolutely.
even just talking to somebody, it might be a very stressful situation. But in certain situations, if you expose yourself to that level of uncomfortability or vulnerability, even that can eventually build up. And the first few times it might not go well, but at the end of the day, the alternative to a awkward encounter or whatever is no encounter and no growth opportunity for yourself personally or for your idea. So
Yeah,
I think both of
yeah,
those are, there's two sides to that where you find people that are able to complement your skills, and then at the same time focus on developing certain skills that you see as valuable. In this case, to find new channels for a delicious nut snack mix. But yeah, I think that kind of on both sides there is important to consider as you go.
very true. Good
Mhm.
point. And it makes me think that much of it is, should we say, situational dependent. So, for example, if you're starting a small business, like creating a game like Lightning, uh, you're going to have a certain mindset and you're going to wear a lot of different hats.
Mhm.
A lot of things come into play. Resources come into play. Now, there's financial resources, there's intellectual resources, there are skill set resources. Now, take that to a small company. Let's say you're working for a small company, 20, 30 people. You're going to have different um, responsibilities and potential limitations, but also opportunities. So there are two sides to these coins, as you put out, make the point. But let's take that to the next step where you're working for a very, very large company.
Mhm.
Now, there are going to be restrictions, limitations, but also different opportunities.
Yeah.
So, as you point out, Rick, you know, within an environment like a Fortune 500 company, for example, the fact is they have almost unlimited resources. Now, if it's a public company, a lot of other things come into
Yeah.
play in terms of responsibilities to shareholders and
Hmm.
laws, reportings, and so forth. But the fact is, they have almost unlimited resources, but they also have different objectives.
Yeah.
Just to make a real quick point to that effect, I thought before about this. Amazon is not interested in finding a business that generates $10 million a year. To you and I, that's like, wow, man, $10 million a
Yeah.
year with 20% margins. Oh my
Hmm.
goodness. that doesn't even get on the radar for Amazon or Meta, you know,
Yeah,
or
it's a
it's
rounding error.
it's a they write that off, and yeah, that's supplies, office supplies for
Yeah,
one
no,
office. So you
yeah,
get the point, though.
yeah. That's another quote from the Netflix founder, who the rounding error term was thrown at them from Blockbuster, who was the big guy in the
Uh,
movie space, the movie rental, and eventually I can't remember where it came from, but so be careful about who you consider to be a rounding error. Um,
I think, by the way, Bill Gates said that at one point. He said, "Be sure to be nice to the nerds,
oh
the
yeah.
nerds, if you will." He said, "Someday they may be your boss."
Yeah, and that goes back to
So
somebody maybe loving something that you hate to do in the work settings. Oh,
very, very good point. Very
yes.
good point. So what does that bring us to for you who are watching this? Perhaps in my mind, and elaborate on this as you see fit.
Hmm.
To me, it brings us to a mindset of
Yeah,
it. You know, don't be afraid to think a little bit outside the box, but keeping in mind the realities of your
yeah.
situation and opportunities.
And
But
I was
think
just
that
going to
way.
say, you mentioned the Fortune 500 companies and resources that they have. But there's a lot of times I think where those big companies have done something a certain way for so long. And that's where I think having some of the toolkit, some of the tools in your toolbox of an entrepreneur, you can kind of shake things up where the initial objection might be, um, we already have a system in place for that. But one of the things I want to get into is the concept of design thinking. And this is
Hmm,
sort of a feedback method to get, kind of feedback from your customers. And even in a corporate setting, there's still, um, those customers. So I think, having the willingness to take the risk, even just bring up the idea sometimes to a manager. Maybe you have an idea for invoice tracking, for example. Hey, I want to try, doing it this way. Maybe they say, no, no, that's, a bad idea. Maybe, you talk to another manager and they say, we actually, this person was working on a new system, but XYZ happened. They moved on to a different team, so they didn't get to finish this work and it was left behind. And in the entrepreneurial spirit of thinking, maybe you go and reach out to them and they say, hey, I have something 75% done, but I got promoted into a new role. I just didn't have the time to finish it. You can take it and run with it. And sometimes in the corporate setting, sometimes people can be less possessive of ideas.
interesting.
And that's all just kind of a balance there. So
That's a real good point. You know, you're going to run into different personalities, and there will be obstacles no matter what you
mhm.
do. If you're doing it on your own, often it'll seem like, oh my goodness, I have this giant mountain to climb by
Yeah.
myself. But if you're within a corporate environment, sometimes you do have to overcome some of those personality
Hmm.
issues. Not everyone is going to be as
Yeah.
excited and enthusiastic as you are. And sometimes people just have bad days. So make sure to overcome those types of obstacles
Yeah.
in whatever setting you're in. But
Okay, so now we've talked a little bit about just general concepts and things to keep in mind, but now we want to share a couple of examples. And I'm not sure if we, touched on the company that you used to work for, and there's a long kind of history and some things we could talk about for a while on there. But it
right,
sounded like you had
right.
something in your experience with Polk, who I know is involved with the title registration, um, licensing operations for government organizations. So, maybe we could kind of follow, what comes to mind with your experiences at Polk.
That was a real good experience from an entrepreneurial
Hmm.
standpoint that you I'm glad you brought it up. R.L. Polk and Company was a Detroit company formed in the late 1870s, family owned, started in the city directory business and built into an automotive sphere where they compiled statistics on automobile registrations. Real sharp people in a unique position and time in space, if you will, in Detroit to take advantage of the growth of the auto industry, and they found a niche that they capitalized on, but they didn't limit it to that.
Hmm.
And so when I joined there in 1980s, the the group that I joined was very small, about 7 people, 8 people in this small division of a company of about 2,000. But the gentleman I worked with was very entrepreneurial, so it was just a tremendous opportunity for us to try a lot of new things, and we had support from the management. So that was a real interesting one because the company itself was, as you had mentioned before, very set in its ways, had long established business, and in some ways, to be honest
Hmm.
with you, it was limiting for them. But they needed more entrepreneurial and innovative thought because they had such a stellar reputation in the industry that they really could have leveraged it more. So we did some neat things. That was a good example of where the opportunity, we took advantage of the opportunity and we were able to innovate. We developed several products. We developed some products that were successful. A couple of them were very successful, which could, within my mind, they were very successful. They weren't Amazon type successful,
Yeah.
but real interesting, neat products, each of a couple of which could be a good case study, a good example of what we did and some of the innovations that we implemented, and then a couple not so good, ones
Hmm.
that
And
were a
those,
little ahead of our
sometimes
times.
that's where you can learn even more,
Learned a
and
lot.
things that don't end up working the way that you planned out. And that comes back to, if you would have just kind of had that in your mind as a good idea, you could lose so much time just pondering on it, trying to develop something without getting it out there. I guess just one maybe last question there. Were there any times that you got pushback from someone for trying to, step on toes or anything like that?
Where I was at, I had full support of the management. So I personally didn't encounter a tremendous amount of
Okay.
resistance, but my manager within, again, this very small environment frequently did get pushback from some of the larger divisions
Yeah.
that he was interacting with. And when he started to get pushback, by the way, was when the money started rolling in.
Mm,
So
interesting. And also,
so as success grew, possessiveness also came
yeah.
into play. So as you grow, you're gonna have to navigate. Hopefully, you'll encounter these problems. These are really kind of good problems if
Hmm.
if you have a large pot of money that people are trying to get their fingers in.
Yeah.
Not that it's all about the money, but
Yeah.
so yes, there was pushback at different points at different
Yeah. And
levels,
that's,
and generally you'll find that it's
uh,
all when things become successful.
yeah. Another thing I think that, I liked that you mentioned was your manager almost, it seemed like, was doing what a good manager kind of should do and almost shielding you from, some of the pushbacks from larger divisions where, I've heard examples where they're kind of attacking diagonally maybe. So yeah, that's good that you were supported, and something to look for in a potential manager, as you go through if you're in that kind of corporate setting. So
So yes, it's interesting how the environment that you're in will somewhat dictate what you're able to do and what you choose to do. And there's a big component of the risk and the reward, a lot to be said about that. But you had mentioned that you had some experiences
y-
too within the large corporate environment. Why don't you tell us a little bit about
y-
where that's
definitely,
expanded your thinking?
yeah, I would love to. I can think of one example specifically, and I mentioned already design thinking, and would like to unpack a little bit about that without going into all the details. But I think I mentioned I'm currently working with General Motors, and I had, while I was in college studying undergrad, two supply chain management internships. And between my first and second internship, I noticed while both were great experiences that I got a lot out of, they were incredibly different, from the way I was brought onto the team. They were different teams, different functions still within the purchasing and supply chain organization. But um, noticed, though, at one point that somebody was working on a project that was related to someone leaving a purchasing role and handing it off to someone else. And they created a very nice Excel sheet with different topics basically that somebody would fill out and send to a new employee to ease the burden of transition. So in purchasing, it's very long-term projects. There is a lot of information, and even with a perfect handoff, there's still going to be things that come up that you just will have to get involved with. So trying to minimize the burden of training and the need to kind of come back into meetings with your old teams. So I saw that document that they put together, and I'm not really sure where this idea came from, but I was compelled to spin that off almost and create something to standardize the internship experience. So, are you familiar though with design thinking at all? I can give a quick rundown on that. I think that might be helpful.
You used the term, and to be honest with you, I'd like to hear more about it. It's a
Yeah,
rather
so
new term, and maybe you folks out there would benefit from it.
yeah,
Design
so
thinking.
I
Tell me
think
more.
I was first introduced to this in a packaging class at Michigan State University that I took as an elective. But the concept of design thinking is letting the customer basically tell you
Hmm.
what they want. And if you ask them what they want, they won't always be able to tell you.
Hmm.
So this goes back to that feedback loop and prototyping. And I don't know, I'm not an expert on this. And again, this is not my idea. This is a pretty well documented idea, but you would basically start with someone's pain points. So in this example of the
Huh.
internship, I first off wanted to talk to people that had had multiple internships. People with only one experience was great feedback points too, but seeing either two experiences with the same company or an experience with one company compared to the experience with another. And in these situations, I wasn't saying or suggesting anything. It was very, start with very open ended questions. It's almost like sales of like, what are you working on? What are your goals? But in this case, it was, what was your onboarding experience like? What was your first contacts? How were the roles and the goals of your assignment laid out to you? And what I learned was that it was a very different experience kind of across the board. Um, so that was the biggest thing though. It was finding my customers, and we could go into this a little bit more. There were multiple customers, but that was the first step, was the
Hmm.
end user, in my case being new interns. What do they want on their first day through their first week? How do they want to be introduced to projects to be successful in a short time? Because it's really 3 months maximum in between school years. So there's really a lot to take on there, and can go into more of kind of what happened with the project. But that's, I guess, into just
Yeah.
design thinking. Is you start very broadly, and then as you get feedback, you can start to make a prototype, which I already had kind of a rough prototype from this other project they were working on. And in that example, I saw some of that range. I had one person, it was a team project that was working on this handoff document. One person was all in on take this, use it, however you can leverage it, do it. But another person was like, well, we're already working on this, and they weren't, they didn't, I guess, assume negative intent, but it was just a different mindset where they were so focused on their project versus others who were really enabling. And that's something I kind of look for in leaders, and a different topic. But um, that was something I kind of had to work through, and that took me, I had to take a step back and say, I see an opportunity. I want to recognize the great work you're doing in such a way that brings it to another division that gets to benefit from it. So
That's very interesting. What strikes me about that is your mindset. And this is important for you folks tuning in. You chose to do that. You didn't have to. You realized something, an opportunity quickly, apparently. Now, a couple things. First of all, you were looking for the opportunity.
yeah.
You had the right frame of mind. You felt confident enough within the environment. Now, you may or may not, if it sounds like, have been fully supported the whole
Hmm.
way. You made a conscious choice
Hmm.
to look for ways to improve where you were. And I have to say that that is
Yeah.
a lesson unto itself. If you're open to and looking for innovation
Yeah.
within a huge company where you were the lowest among the whale, you were the lowest of the low within this giant organization of 70,000 people, right?
Yeah.
Whereas in my case, I was pretty low at a company of about 2,000, but very equivalent
Hmm.
opportunities, and they are there for you, whether you're in a small company of 20, company of a couple thousand, or a company of
Yeah.
75,000. Always be looking for
Uh-huh.
those.
And then there's another thing that comes to mind, another parallel that I want to draw is from this internship handoff welcome guide is to license plate bingo. So
Ah,
I talk about getting feedback from your customer for design thinking. So if you think about it, if we could have this great product for an intern to have everything they need when they start, but I was an intern myself. I knew on August 19th was my last day and I go back up to school. So, how do I make sure that this actually gets used? I spent hours and hours working on this. So, I had to find my secondary customer. So, for license plate bingo, the customer that uses the product would have been the general public. In my case, it was an intern, but how do you distribute it? So you talked about, and I can't remember what that was, but the travel agency or the travel association. So I had to find that part, which was kind of like
yeah.
two pronged. And I had a team of people I was able to rally some of the other interns to help me out with this. And they added a ton of value going out and expanding our feedback pool. And then I was sort of able to, with the help of others, obviously navigate how our company operated from an HR perspective. So I learned that the internship program was managed and the day to day operations were ran by a group of the full time rotational employees in this program. But then, sort of managing them was this committee of managers. So I basically had three customers. So the interns, the future interns, the operations folks who manage the program from like the meetings you go to and the events that are set up just to expose you to different parts of the company. And then I had to get the HR support to set it kind of as a standard. So I really had to get buy-in from the customer, the team that would actually be sending this
Hmm.
document out, and then also the management slash HR team that would support this, and had to manage that as well because in a way, this could have very easily been taken as I had a bad experience. We need to change this. But I don't think it came off that way because I talked about opportunity opposed to like negativity and was able to eventually get the buy in from the management and the HR team because of those conversations I had. And I could call it, it wasn't my idea at this point. This became an idea of representative of the class. And I had a list of 15 people that I got to talk to about why this is important. And at that point, again, it's not something that I'm just trying to do to get credit for. It's something where there's a need for. And in entrepreneurship, that's not what's going to work. It's just, I think this is such a great idea and I want to be famous entrepreneur driving around the Bentley, whatever. Where things take off and where things stick is when what you're trying to provide to someone and what value you can add. So that I think was just a really fun experience. I got to meet a ton of people, and another thing too in the corporate setting is meeting people. It's great to just most people that I work with are open to just have coffee, talk about your weekend plans. But if you can do some of that and then also kind of combine that with a productive topic on what you're working on, you can get a little more information on their work style as well. So that was again just a good example. And
That's a fantastic example of making the best of a situation that you're in at any level. And you can take those principles to wherever you are. And it does come back to what do you seek? And not everyone is going to start their own company,
mhm,
but I think the point here is your mindset that you take into every situation that you encounter, work related and beyond. Life's not just about work, but what you put in is
Yeah.
often what you're going to get out.
Yeah.
The mindset is going to affect the financial side of things. And it's an interrelation that the financial side of things can affect the mindset. So, what do I mean by that? Well, you're going to struggle sometimes to get the money that you need to do what you want to do, whether it's within a large corporate environment or whether you're starting something from scratch. And on the other hand, if you have the money to begin with, often you don't need the money. So it's a funny little thing where I said about Amazon, they
Yeah.
don't care about even a $50 million,
Hmm.
revenue increase is negligible for them. So there is a lot to be said about that. And perhaps,
Yeah.
perhaps we can go into that further, and where the rubber hits the road, or where the bag hits the board. Lightning is a good example of where we could right now use some money. And, if we had 50 or $100,000, we could do some things that
Yeah.
could take that game to a very interesting level.
Yeah.
Or if we had $1 million.
But on the flip side,
So
there's still things we can do with $0. You talked
correct.
about in your short episode of, you can, if you take some of those mindsets like you used in the convention to build connections, get people interested, they will
Yes.
be more interested. They buy in. They're kind of curious. I'm like, maybe that would be a fun game. Maybe I will let you use some of my scrap cardboard to make some prototypes.
Exactly. Good point.
Stuff like
Yeah.
that.
So, go out to the website, ideabanknow.com. That's ideabanknow.com.
I think that's another piece of this where bringing together finances, ideas, shared skill sets or complementary skill sets is where we see things, I guess, kind of getting the catalyst, maybe would be the right word, to go to the next level and really start to see things happen.
Couldn't agree more. And the principle you're talking about has application in, again, whatever environment you're in,
Yeah.
whether you're a one-man show, a five-person show, medium, small company, medium-sized company, large company. The particulars differ, but these principles are
Hmm.
applicable to your situation.
Yeah. Okay. Well, anything else that's coming to mind? I think that was
No,
hopefully somebody was able to gather a thing or two from that. And
thank you.
as you go into your workday, whether that's today or tomorrow, hopefully you can come at some new obstacles with hopefully a different mindset. And
Thank you for tuning in. Until next time,
all right.
follow
Thank
your
you.
dream.